Hi, Read 585. This is part 3 of our week 5 lectures. We are in our unit of using data to drive decision making. So we're going to take a look at those articles from week 4 to look at a couple school-wide approaches for improving literacy instruction and practices and overall effectiveness of the school. So our two objectives for this session is first to describe strategies used for effective school improvement initiatives. So those come out of the week 4 readings. Both of those articles are geared toward whole school improvement initiatives to really look at the performance of all readers kind of on a larger scale. And then the second goal is to describe practices for improving the performance of all students. But the week 5 readings that's regarding to pertain more to specific subgroups and special populations. So both of those articles involve schools that are at risk of being on the watch list because they are having high concentration of students at the high performing level and the low performing level. And so there's a big discrepancy there. So looking at what can be done to improve the learning of all children, regardless of subgroup they may fall in. So, last week you had a couple of choice articles. The first one is the Building Knowledge and Fashioning Success, One School at a Time. This article opens with the quote, "For the past 4 years, we have been studying schools that are unusually successful in the area of literacy. At the same time, we have also been studying less successful schools." So a great way to collect some data, look at examples of schools exhibiting the desired traits and outcomes, and then also look at non-examples to see what you shouldn't do. Reminds me of a Henry Ford quote I read recently that said something along the lines of failure is the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. So we can actually learn from our less successful schools to get a better idea of what we should be doing. So the authors continue, our good friend Marjorie Lipson of our Lipson and Wixon text from 516. They say, "One thing that has become abundantly clear, successful schools do not just happen by accident, rather success is fashioned by the educators, students, and community members." So that is where the title of the article comes from, Fashioning Success. So it doesn't just happen unintentionally. It is very strategic what goes on in these successful schools. So they didn't have a lot of space in their article to elaborate on the research behind factors for effective and successful schools, but they did provide a nice summary in table or figure 1 where it talks about these key factors associated with school success. First, strong and determined leadership, orderly classrooms and effective classroom management. It's very difficult for students to learn in a chaotic environment, so it definitely should be orderly, smooth transitions, maximizing instructional time, which is the next part, effective use of instructional time. High expectations for student performance, collaborative effort among professionals, which is huge for things like response to intervention and special education. What is the collaboration happening that really impacts student achievement in a positive way if different professionals can be collaborating? And then effective home communication, as well as extensive and effective professional development, and we'll come back to that idea, and specific instructional practices. So previous research has hinted at these being key factors related to school success. So fashioning success. They didn't just study effective teachers because students need more than just one effective teacher to become highly skilled. So they emphasize that this is a study of an effective school, more of a systemic approach, because one effective teacher is great, but you really need more than one effective teacher. Right now, within my organization, we have the slogan of 1095 because that's how many days are in 3 years. And we're very focused on providing continuity across 3 years of instruction so that students can be on the college ready pathway. So it is very important that students have an effective teacher year in and year out, and the authors of this article brought that up. Their research was done on outlier schools, so schools who are successful compared to schools that are not, and the standouts. It reminded me of chapter, I think, 19 of this book, Accountability in Action by Douglas Reeves, who does a lot with accountability for schools. Chapter 19 is the 90-90-90 study, pretty interesting. These schools have 90% free and reduced lunch, 90% ethnic minorities, and 90% of students are meeting or exceeding standards for reading achievement. So I actually have that chapter in PDF if you're interested in reading it, but it's pretty interesting to take a look at. So kind of made a text-to-text connection there with this article. So the authors deemed a successful school as one in which 80% or more of grade 2 and 4 students are meeting or exceeding the state standards on 3 tests of reading. So that's what they were qualifying as a successful school. So they formed 3 groups or clusters of schools. The first was the Uptown cluster. This was more of the affluent urban and suburban area. Country was small and rural. Main Street was small to medium towns. So within these clusters, they looked for those outlier schools, the ones that are successful in having 80% or more meeting the achievement goals. And surprisingly, many of the uptown schools weren't successful using their criteria to measure success. So a lot of times you think just because it's in an affluent area means, that they're a high performing school, but this wasn't actually the case in this study. So their findings: what makes for an effective school? What did they learn from those outlier schools that were successful and the ones that were definitely not successful, the non-examples? So the first factor was expertise, pertaining to a few different things. First, the teachers being knowledgeable and articulate and being able to provide a strong rationale for instruction. So not only do they know their content area, but they know things about pedagogy, they know different instructional strategies, they can think on their feet, they can adjust instruction, they can use the formative assessment process, they can do all of these things and more, and ultimately speak very clearly about what they're doing and why. All right, the next piece would be expertise in classroom management, which was found in previous studies, classroom management being so important since it leads to a well-managed pace of instruction where time is not being wasted and lost on less important things. And then also in the area of expertise is extensive professional development. So at the school level, there was a shared knowledge. They, had shared learning experiences where they were doing book studies and able to cite from specific books. They attended workshops and conferences, a lot of rich professional development happening. All right, other findings that contributed to success were opportunity. This relating to the opportunities students had to read and write on a daily basis. So the Matthew effect of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So we want to provide more opportunities for them to be exposed to reading and writing so that they can gain skills from those opportunities. They also made the recommendation of 500 books per classroom. All right, and the last piece for an effective school was commitment. So a long-term commitment to literacy improvement, and with that, a shared vision. So having a stable school administration. I talked about previously how a lot of times employers are asking in interviews how long you plan to stay because they really do want stability. It's hard to implement change in just 1 year, and we don't want to have a lot of turnover with our leaders in the school because, as this article points out, individual leaders can greatly impact literacy and have a strong influence on literacy. So, having that commitment to an initiative for more than a year and having a shared vision amongst staff is very important as well. So, implications for professional development coming out of this study. First is obviously the need to build expertise. So, in order to build expertise, we need professional development that's first of all differentiated, and that was discussed in the Fisher and Frey article about how they had to modify their implementation of their school improvement approach for new teachers. So, differentiated development is very important. Also, it should be sustained and ongoing for a period of time, and it's best if teachers have a voice in their professional development, which was also apparent from the Fisher and Frey article from last week. All right, providing opportunity is very important. We need to coach teachers in how to provide students with rich opportunities with text and print, reading and writing. Next is shared vision being important. They mentioned in this article that they really tried to build a collaborative community with high expectations and a climate of commitment, and how teachers frequently talked about how everyone is responsible for all students. So every staff member is important. There isn't a hierarchy amongst the staff members, and then also we're responsible for all students. The idea of all students, a lot of times teachers can be a little egocentric or classroom centric and talk about my students this, my students that, but we really need to shift our thinking to talking about our students, and that's something we've been doing a lot this year. One of our norms is actually our students in parentheses, and making sure we're considering the big picture of all of our students, because we are really committed to making sure students have effective teachers at every grade level, not just that I'm an effective teacher, but I'm helping my colleagues develop professionally, and I'm thinking big picture about our students, not, so focused on me, my room, my students sort of thing. So that is definitely an implication from this study, the importance that we have our common vision and we're really bought in and invested in that vision. And then lastly, making a commitment for longer than a year. We really need to dig deep and commit to something for a period of time. And not everyone is going to be ready to make a change. We can't wait for everyone to be ready to make a change. We have to just dive in. You have to have courage to jump into the ocean and no longer be able to see the shore. All right, the second article we took a look at was that Meeting AYP in a High Need School, a Formative Experiment, the Fisher, Frey, and Lapp article, which I really enjoyed reading about. I feel like it's organized very well. It gives you a concrete structure of 6 steps, and it kind of walks you through their process of each of those steps. So I liked this quote from the opening of their article. Despite teachers who work really hard, these schools are not places in which students achieve. So I feel like in a lot of school settings, teachers work really hard, but are they working smarter, not harder? Are they being intentional with what they're doing? That was something I had to coach someone on this year, was they were coming to work and spending a ton of time at work, but I couldn't really tell you what they were doing during all of that time because they were not very focused on what's important or what matters. And then they also brought up in the introduction of this article was the fact that teachers are resistive to teaching those content literacy strategies. And why is that? Is it a, skill deficit? Do they need more information? Do they need help? Are they kind of fearful of failing with those, or is it a mindset thing? So, like you all recognized in our discussion forum, this is a very big reality of content area teachers not being comfortable with those literacy strategies. So, some school data from this article, there 60% of their population qualify for free and reduced lunch. 40% of students are homeless and living in cars. So a lot of challenges and contextual factors there to overcome. Schools known for violence, drug use, gang activity, teen pregnancy, a whole a lot of stressors there on the community. Interesting, in 2002, 12% of the Western students scored proficient or advanced on the state assessment of reading, and then 67% graduated. So that's interesting that that number is so much higher than the proficiency percentage, which means we're graduating a lot of people at the school who aren't proficient or advanced. That's a bit concerning. So how are we going to tackle this big picture of this school and improving the school? So step number one, identify and justify a valued pedagogical goal. So they actually walk you through their process of creating a school elective literacy leadership team. And this is a great strategy for investing not only a core group of teachers in the process, but then they can leverage the larger population of teachers. So great thinking here, Fisher and Frey, creating this building level literacy leadership team. So they took those members and talked with them a lot. There were some resistors there for sure about what is our goal here. And most of them wanted to have a goal focused on AYP. And so the authors of this study had to really broaden their scope that improving AYP would be a positive outcome of a bigger goal focused on pedagogy. So defining student success in terms of their progress, not in terms of performance on a state test. So by the end of their meeting, they were able to come up with the goal that students would develop literacy habits that could translate from class to class and eventually to college, professional settings, etc. So that was their goal. The leadership team presented that goal. They voted on it, and as a larger staff, and 82% approved it, and that was their goal. So they moved on to step 2, which was specifying an intervention and providing a rationale. So they spent a lot of time discussing the fractured nature of instruction happening and the various routines in every class and how that would be difficult to navigate as a student. You have this expectation in this class, and then you go to your next class and the expectations are completely different. There's no continuity, there's no transfer of skills from class to class. So they definitely wanted to do something about that. So they researched many of the effective strategies that could be applicable in different content area settings, and they came up with Cornell note-taking, think alouds, writing to learn, and dedicated reading time, which sounds a lot like what we talked about in the last article, having that opportunity for extensive work with reading and writing, so providing time for students to work with text. That was one of their strategies, dedicating time to reading. So those were their interventions they came up with, those 4 different things. For step 3, they needed to then collect data to determine the factors that would hinder or enhance the effectiveness of those interventions. So I love the questions they used, which were very strength-based and positively framed. What's working better this month? Who do we need to recognize for their contribution? So that's very positive, affirming things, but then also, what are the needs that we're seeing here? So they completed a good number of classroom observations, not really to look at specific teachers, but to look at big picture to make recommendations for the use of professional development time. So they were really collecting data and evidence, thinking about what's hindering right now so we can use that data, which is step number 4. Use the data to modify the intervention. So part of their plan was doing weekly professional development, and the focus of those was determined by, the data they collected in step number 3. And so they had to do several modifications to their interventions because they learned that this core group of teachers, the leadership team they had developed, were kind of like the blind leading the blind, or at least that's how they felt. They didn't have a lot of skills with these strategies, intervention strategies, Cornell notes, that kind of thing, the think aloud, to be able to coach someone else in that skill. So they needed to provide more support to that leadership team. Another modification they made for this 4th step was thinking about new teacher support and how that might look very different from teachers who have more experience under their belts. And then lastly, there were a lot of student behavior concerns that were inhibiting the effectiveness of the interventions. We've talked about the research supporting, solid classroom management, structured environment, orderly environment. So they kind of had to get that under control before moving on to step 5, which was considering the positive and negative effects that the intervention is producing beyond the associated goal. So they wanted to do Cornell note taking, and in implementing that, new questions were being raised, like the fact that students actually couldn't summarize, and this was inhibiting, having a negative, impact on the intervention. So they needed to take a step back and teach students how to do the summarizing. And then the last step is considering the extent to which the educational environment has changed. So measuring your results, measuring your outcomes, and they found out that in just over 6 months of work, their achievement increased to 21% proficient from 12%. So that's a pretty big deal. And then 2 years later, it went up to 47%. So again, from this study, they found that a school-wide approach to content literacy instruction is an effective way to raise student achievement. They implemented those 4 strategies and found that many secondary schools, and probably elementary as well, the problem is not the development of the plan, but the actual implementation of it. And I feel like they were very candid in this article in describing some of the setbacks that they faced through this process. Teacher turnover, making a lot of progress initially in introducing those 4 strategies, but then, at that 4-month point of implementation, kind of hitting a wall where teachers didn't have a lot of resources at that time and weren't kind of hit a hurdle in implementation. So again, the big implication out of this is that the school-wide approach to content literacy instruction will be effective in raising student achievement. So this could be something you share with those naysayers at your school. All right, for week 5, you have 2 articles to choose from, and these are geared more again toward, helping a subgroup perform, versus these articles from this week, from week 4, we're looking at more whole school reform and change and improvement. So enjoy these articles for week 5. And those were objectives. Hopefully you feel like we met them. And thanks to Vince, we have a cute launch here. It is a cartoon of these little boys who can't seem to find the Wi-Fi on their books. So I actually read an article about e-readers lately and how it's difficult to recall information when you've read it on an e-reader, because when you read, a printed page, you often can associate where you found some information based on where it was located on the page if you're going back to reference the text, but it's really hard to do that on the e-reader. So definitely, benefits and challenges of using only technology. And here a challenge would be these poor little students here don't know quite what to do with the good old-fashioned book. So thank you, Vince. I definitely chuckled to this and appreciated this launch. All right, everyone, have a great week. We will be back next week for week 6. We're still talking about using data to drive decision making and to improve school effectiveness. I'm going to talk a little bit more about professional learning communities as mentioned in the Reading Teacher article, and then we'll also start to read about one of my favorite topics, response to intervention, RTI. Have a great week.